Welcome to the Audiobook channel, where we dive into the depths of thought-provoking literature. We present to you, Karl Marx, a comprehensive exploration of the life, ideas, and impact of one of the most influential thinkers in history. Get ready to delve into the world of Karl Marx and his groundbreaking contributions to philosophy, economics, and social theory. Who was Karl Marx? How did Karl Marx die? What was Karl Marx's family like? Read a brief summary of this topic. Karl Marx, born May 5, 1818, Trier, Rhine Province, Prussia, Germany, died March 14, 1883, London, England, revolutionary, sociologist, historian, and economist. He published, with Friedrich Engels, Manifest der Kommunistischen Partei, 1848, commonly known as the Communist Manifesto, the most celebrated pamphlet in the history of the socialist movement. He also was the author of the movement's most important book, Das Kapital. These writings and others by Marx and Engels form the basis of the body of thought and belief known as Marxism. See also socialism, communism. Karl Marx. Karl Heinrich Marx, born May 5, 1818, Trier, Rhine Province, Prussia, Germany. Died March 14, 1883, London, England, aged 64. Founder, first international notable works, Das Kapital, the Communist Manifesto. Subjects of study: Capitalism, exchange value, philosophy of history. Early years. Karl Heinrich Marx was the oldest surviving boy of 9 children. His father, Heinrich, a successful lawyer, was a man of the Enlightenment, devoted to Kant and Voltaire, who took part in agitations for a constitution in Prussia. His mother, born Henrietta Pressburg, was from Holland. Both parents were Jewish and were descended from a long line of rabbis. But, a year or so before Karl was born, his father, probably because his professional career required it, was baptized in the evangelical established church. Karl was baptized when he was 6 years old. Although as a youth Karl was influenced less by religion than by the critical, sometimes radical social policies of the Enlightenment, his Jewish background exposed him to prejudice and discrimination that may have led him to question the role of religion in society and contributed to his desire for social change. Marx was educated from 1830 to 1835 at the high school in Trier. Suspected of harboring liberal teachers and pupils, the school was under police surveillance. Marx's writings during this period exhibited a spirit of Christian devotion and a longing for self-sacrifice on behalf of humanity. In October 1835 he matriculated at the University of Bonn. The courses he attended were exclusively in the humanities, in such subjects as Greek and Roman mythology and the history of art. He participated in customary student activities, fought a duel, and spent a day in jail for being drunk and disorderly. He presided at the Tavern Club, which was at odds with the more aristocratic student associations, and joined a poets' club that included some political activists. A politically rebellious student culture was, indeed, part of life at Bonn. Many students had been arrested. Some were still being expelled in Marx's time, particularly as a result of an effort by students to disrupt a session of the Federal Diet at Frankfurt. Marx, however, left Bonn after a year and in October 1836 enrolled at the University of Berlin to study law and philosophy. Philosophy 101. Marx's crucial experience at Berlin was his introduction to Hegel's philosophy, regnant there, and his adherence to the young Hegelians. At first he felt a repugnance toward Hegel's doctrines. When Marx fell sick, it was partially, as he wrote his father, from intense vexation at having to make an idol of a view I detested. The Hegelian pressure in the revolutionary student culture was powerful, however, and Marx joined a society called the Doctor Club, whose members were intensely involved in the new literary and philosophical movement. Their chief figure was Bruno Bauer, a young lecturer in theology, who was developing the idea that the Christian Gospels were a record not of history but of human fantasies arising from emotional needs, and that Jesus had not been a historical person. Marx enrolled in a course of lectures given by Bauer on the prophet Isaiah. Bauer taught that a new social catastrophe, more tremendous than that of the advent of Christianity, was in the making. The young Hegelians began moving rapidly toward atheism and also talked vaguely of political action. The Prussian government, fearful of the subversion latent in the young Hegelians, soon undertook to drive them from the universities. Bauer was dismissed from his post in 1839. Marx's most intimate friend of this period, Adolf Ruttenberg, an older journalist who had served a prison sentence for his political radicalism, pressed for a deeper social involvement. By 1841, the young Hegelians had become left Republicans. Marx's studies, meanwhile, were lagging. Urged by his friends, he submitted a doctoral dissertation to the University at Jena, which was known to be lax in its academic requirements, and received his degree in April 1841. His thesis analyzed in a Hegelian fashion the difference between the natural philosophies of Democritus and Epicurus. More distinctively, it sounded a note of Promethean defiance. Philosophy makes no secret of it. Prometheus' admission, "In sooth all gods I hate," is its own admission, its own motto against all gods. Prometheus is the noblest saint and martyr in the calendar of philosophy. In 1841, Marx, together with other young Hegelians, was much influenced by the publication of Das Wesen des Christentums, 1841. The Essence of Christianity, by Ludwig Feuerbach. Its author, to Marx's mind, successfully criticized Hegel, an idealist who believed that matter or existence was inferior to and dependent upon mind or spirit, from the opposite, or materialist, standpoint, showing how the absolute spirit was a projection of the real man standing on the foundation of nature. Henceforth, Marx's philosophical efforts were toward a combination of Hegel's dialectic, the idea that all things are in a continual process of change resulting from the conflicts between their contradictory aspects, with Feuerbach's materialism, which placed material conditions above ideas. In January 1842, Marx began contributing to a newspaper newly founded in Cologne, the Rheinische Zeitung. It was the liberal democratic organ of a group of young merchants, bankers, and industrialists. Cologne was the center of the most industrially advanced section of Prussia. To this stage of Marx's life belongs an essay on the freedom of the press. Since he then took for granted the existence of absolute moral standards and universal principles of ethics, he condemned censorship as a moral evil that entailed spying into people's minds and hearts and assigned to weak and malevolent mortals powers that presupposed an omniscient mind. He believed that censorship could have only evil consequences. On October 15, 1842, Marx became editor of the Rheinische Zeitung. As such, he was obliged to write editorials on a variety of social and economic issues, ranging from the housing of the Berlin poor and the theft by peasants of wood from the forests to the new phenomenon of communism. He found Hegelian idealism of little use in these matters. At the same time he was becoming estranged from his Hegelian friends for whom shocking the bourgeois was a sufficient mode of social activity. Marx, friendly at this time to the liberal-minded practical men, who were struggling step by step for freedom within constitutional limits, succeeded in trebling his newspaper's circulation and making it a leading journal in Prussia. Nevertheless, Prussian authorities suspended it for being too outspoken, and Marx agreed to co-edit with the liberal Hegelian Arnold Ruge a new review, the Deutsch-Französische Jahrbucher, German-French yearbooks, which was to be published in Paris. First, however, in June 1843 Marx, after an engagement of 7 years, married Jenny von Westphalen. Jenny was an attractive, intelligent, and much admired woman, 4 years older than Karl. She came of a family of military and administrative distinction. Her half-brother later became a highly reactionary Prussian minister of the interior. Her father, a follower of the French socialist Saint Simon, was fond of Karl, though others in her family opposed the marriage. Marx's father also feared that Jenny was destined to become a sacrifice to the demon that possessed his son. 4 months after their marriage, the young couple moved to Paris, which was then the center of socialist thought and of the more extreme sects that went under the name of communism. There, Marx first became a revolutionary and a communist and began to associate with communist societies of French and German workingmen. Their ideas were, in his view, utterly crude and unintelligent, but their character moved him. The brotherhood of man is no mere phrase with them, but a fact of life, and the nobility of man shines upon us from their work-hardened bodies, he wrote in his so-called Ökonomische Philosophische Manuskript aus dem Jahre 1844, written in 1844. Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts of 1844, 1959. These manuscripts were not published for some 100 years, but they are influential because they show the humanist background to Marx's later historical and economic theories. The German-French yearbooks proved short-lived, but through their publication Marx befriended Friedrich Engels, a contributor who was to become his lifelong collaborator, and in their pages appeared Marx's article Zur Kritik der Hegelischen Rechtsphilosophie, toward the critique of the Hegelian philosophy of right, with its oft-quoted assertion that religion is the opium of the people. It was there, too, that he first raised the call for an uprising of the proletariat to realize the conceptions of philosophy. Once more, however, the Prussian government intervened against Marx. He was expelled from France and left for Brussels, followed by Engels, in February 1845. That year in Belgium, he renounced his Prussian nationality. Brussels period of Karl Marx. The next 2 years in Brussels saw the deepening of Marx's collaboration with Engels. Engels had seen at first hand in Manchester, England, where a branch factory of his father's textile firm was located, all the depressing aspects of the Industrial Revolution. He had also been a young Hegelian and had been converted to communism by Moses Hess, who was called the Communist Rabbi. In England he associated with the followers of Robert Owen. Now he and Marx, finding that they shared the same views, combined their intellectual resources and published Die Heilige Family, 1845. The Holy Family, a prolix criticism of the Hegelian idealism of the theologian Bruno Bauer. Their next work, Die Deutsche Ideologie, written 1845–46, published 1932, The German Ideology, contained the fullest exposition of their important materialistic conception of history, which set out to show how, historically, societies have been structured to promote the interests of the economically dominant class. but it found no publisher and remained unknown during its authors' lifetimes. During his Brussels years, Marx developed his views and, through confrontations with the chief leaders of the working class movement, established his intellectual standing. In 1846 he publicly excoriated the German leader Wilhelm Weitling for his moralistic appeals. Marx insisted that the stage of bourgeois society could not be skipped over. The proletariat could not just leap into communism. The workers' movement required a scientific basis, not moralistic phrases. He also polemicized against the French socialist thinker Pierre-Joseph Proudhon in Misery de la Philosophie, 1847. The Poverty of Philosophy, a mordant attack on Proudhon's book subtitled Philosophie de la Misère, 1846. The Philosophy of Poverty. Proudhon wanted to unite the best features of such contraries as competition and monopoly. He hoped to save the good features in economic institutions while eliminating the bad. Marx, however, declared that no equilibrium was possible between the antagonisms in any given economic system. Social structures were transient historic forms determined by the productive forces. The handmill gives you society with the feudal lord. The steam mill, society with the industrial capitalist. Proudhon's mode of reasoning, Marx wrote, was typical of the petty bourgeois, who failed to see the underlying laws of history. The Communist Manifesto, a copy of Manifest der Kommunistischen Partei, 1848. The Communist Manifesto, by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, more. An unusual sequence of events led Marx and Engels to write their pamphlet The Communist Manifesto. In June 1847, a secret society, the League of the Just, composed mainly of emigrant German handicraftsmen, met in London and decided to formulate a political program. They sent a representative to Marx to ask him to join the League. Marx overcame his doubts and, with Engels, joined the organization, which thereupon changed its name to the Communist League and enacted a democratic constitution. Entrusted with the task of composing their program, Marx and Engels worked from the middle of December 1847 to the end of January 1848. The London Communists were already impatiently threatening Marx with disciplinary action when he sent them the manuscript. They promptly adopted it as their manifesto. It enunciated the proposition that all history had hitherto been a history of class struggles, summarized in pithy form the materialist conception of history worked out in the German ideology, and asserted that the forthcoming victory of the proletariat would put an end to class society forever. It mercilessly criticized all forms of socialism founded on philosophical cobwebs, such as alienation. It rejected the avenue of social utopias, small experiments in community, as deadening the class struggle and therefore as being reactionary sects. It set forth 10 immediate measures as first steps toward communism, ranging from a progressive income tax and the abolition of inheritances to free education for all children. It closed with the words, "The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Workingmen of all countries, unite." Revolutions suddenly erupted in Europe in the first months of 1848, in France, Italy, and Austria. Marx had been invited to Paris by a member of the provisional government just in time to avoid expulsion by the Belgian government. As the revolution gained in Austria and Germany, Marx returned to the Rhineland. In Cologne he advocated a policy of coalition between the working class and the democratic bourgeoisie,
opposing for this reason the nomination of independent workers' candidates for the Frankfurt Assembly and arguing strenuously against the program for proletarian revolution advocated by the leaders of the Workers' Union. He concurred in Engels's judgment that the Communist Manifesto should be shelved and the Communist League disbanded. Marx pressed his policy through the pages of the Neue Rheinische Zeitung, newly founded in June 1849, urging a constitutional democracy and war with Russia. When the more revolutionary leader of the Workers' Union, Andreas Gottschalk, was arrested, Marx supplanted him and organized the First Rhineland Democratic Congress in August 1848. When the King of Prussia dissolved the Prussian Assembly in Berlin, Marx called for arms and men to help the resistance. Bourgeois liberals withdrew their support from Marx's newspaper, and he himself was indicted on several charges, including advocacy of the non-payment of taxes. In his trial he defended himself with the argument that the Crown was engaged in making an unlawful counter-revolution. The jury acquitted him unanimously and with thanks. Nevertheless, as the last hopeless fighting flared in Dresden and Baden, Marx was ordered banished as an alien on May 16, 1849. The final issue of his newspaper, printed in red, caused a great sensation. Early years in London of Karl Marx. Karl Marx expelled once more from Paris, Marx went to London in August 1849. It was to be his home for the rest of his life. Chagrined by the failure of his own tactics of collaboration with the liberal bourgeoisie, he rejoined the Communist League in London and for about a year advocated a bolder revolutionary policy. An address of the Central Committee to the Communist League, written with Engels in March 1850, urged that in future revolutionary situations they struggle to make the revolution permanent, by avoiding subservience to the bourgeois party and by setting up their own revolutionary workers' governments, alongside any new bourgeois one. Marx hoped that the economic crisis would shortly lead to a revival of the revolutionary movement. When this hope faded, he came into conflict once more with those whom he called the alchemists of the revolution, such as August von Willich, a communist who proposed to hasten the advent of revolution by undertaking direct revolutionary ventures. Such persons, Marx wrote in September 1850, substitute idealism for materialism, and regard pure will as the motive power of revolution instead of actual conditions. While we say to the workers, you have got to go through 15, 20, 50 years of civil wars and national wars not merely in order to change your conditions, but in order to change yourselves and become qualified for political power, you on the contrary tell them, we must achieve power immediately. The militant faction in turn ridiculed Marx for being a revolutionary who limited his activity to lectures on political economy to the Communist Workers' Educational Union. The upshot was that Marx gradually stopped attending meetings of the London Communists. In 1852 he devoted himself intensely to working for the defense of 11 communists arrested and tried in Cologne on charges of revolutionary conspiracy and wrote a pamphlet on their behalf. The same year he also published, in a German-American periodical, his essay, Der 18. Brumaire des Louis Napoleon, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, with its acute analysis of the formation of a bureaucratic absolutist state with the support of the peasant class. In other respects the next 12 years were, in Marx's words, years of isolation, both for him and for Engels in his Manchester factory. From 1850 to 1864 Marx lived in material misery and spiritual pain. His funds were gone, and except on one occasion he could not bring himself to seek paid employment.
In March 1850 he and his wife and 4 small children were evicted and their belongings seized. Several of his children died, including a son Guido, a sacrifice to bourgeois misery, and a daughter Franziska, for whom his wife rushed about frantically trying to borrow money for a coffin. For 6 years the family lived in 2 small rooms in Soho, often subsisting on bread and potatoes. The children learned to lie to the creditors. Mr. Marx ain't upstairs. Once he had to escape them by fleeing to Manchester. His wife suffered breakdowns. Britannica quiz, 41 questions from Britannica's most popular world history quizzes. During all these years, Engels loyally contributed to Marx's financial support. The sums were not large at first, for Engels was only a clerk in the firm of Ehrman and Engels at Manchester. Later, however, in 1864, when he became a partner, his subventions were generous. Marx was proud of Engels's friendship and would tolerate no criticism of him. Bequests from the relatives of Marx's wife and from Marx's friend Wilhelm Wolff also helped to alleviate their economic distress. Marx had one relatively steady source of earned income in the United States. On the invitation of Charles A. Dana, managing editor of the New York Tribune, he became in 1851 its European correspondent.
The newspaper, edited by Horace Greeley, had sympathies for Fourierism, a utopian socialist system developed by the French theorist Charles Fourier. From 1851 to 1862 Marx contributed close to 500 articles and editorials, Engels providing about 1/4 of them. He ranged over the whole political universe, analyzing social movements and agitations from India and China to Britain and Spain.
In 1859 Marx published his first book on economic theory, Zur Kritik der politischen Ökonomie, a contribution to the critique of political economy. In its preface he again summarized his materialistic conception of history, his theory that the course of history is dependent on economic developments. At this time, however, Marx regarded his studies in economic and social history at the British Museum as his main task. He was busy producing the drafts of his magnum opus, which was to be published later as Das Kapital. Some of these drafts, including the outlines and the theories of surplus value, are important in their own right and were published after Marx's death. Load next page.